A couple of days ago, we had one of the craziest events happen to Bitcoin that we've seen in a really long time. So what happened was the price of Bitcoin went from $27,000 all the way up to $30,000, then immediately back down to $27,000 in a matter of around 30 minutes or so. Now, since all this has happened, the price of Bitcoin has been gradually rising and consolidating towards the upside, but this still begs the question, why did this happen in the first place, and is this a positive thing for Bitcoin? So those are the two questions that I want to cover in today's video, because despite this actually happening because of a false news release, which we'll touch on in just a second, this actually looks like it could be a really strong thing for Bitcoin, because one of the things that came out of this was we saw Bitcoin dominance get to the highest place that it's been in over 2.5 years. And on top of this, Bitcoin's price is actually holding really, really well. So what happened with this? What's the chart in front of me? Well, this is the 30-minute chart on Bitcoin, and we can see that the price of Bitcoin went from 27,000 immediately up into the 30,000s, then all the way back down. But as we zoom out, and I'm actually going to switch us over to a daily chart here. As we zoom out here, we can see that Bitcoin has been consolidating back towards the upside. So this is what that big candle looks like right in here on a daily time scale. So we're a little bit more zoomed out. You can see the wick up here from where the price retraced, but overall on the day, Bitcoin still held about half of its profits in the green. Now, why did this happen? Let's answer that question first. Well, it all started with Cointelegraph accidentally posting that a Bitcoin ETF was approved. Of course, this wasn't true. They immediately scrubbed it. I think they even apologized that it was a false post. I forget if they did or someone else did. But it turns out that they just made a false assumption or a false post that this Bitcoin ETF was approved. And in reality, this wasn't the case. But the reaction that we saw was that in minutes of time, Bitcoin was able to pump double digits. It was able to pump about 10% plus to the upside. And even after the news was proven to be false and an accident, Bitcoin still held about a 5% pump on this move. So I guess the real question here is this a good thing for Bitcoin? Is this a bad thing for Bitcoin? And let me explain. So number one, Bitcoin holding about a 5% move to the upside at a time like this is a positive one. And also on top of this, we saw Bitcoin go up and actually break back through its 200-day moving average and close above it. Now, since then, the following candle on a Tuesday was coming back over here, and this one's actually closing on top of the 200-day moving average as well. Both things are going to be positive here. So now what this does is this is putting a little bit more pressure back into that 29K resistance line. And that's the kind of the main area that we've been struggling to break for the bulk of this consolidation that has been around 29,000 on the high side, all the way down to around 25,000 on the low side. And we see that ever since Bitcoin broke down into this kind of sideways channel of sorts, that has been the overbearing resistance that has been holding price kind of down in this little range that we have. So the big takeaway here is that yes, while this pump was caused by a fake news event, it gave us a lot of insight about what we can expect when an actual ETF approval happens. And so what I mean by that is if Bitcoin was able to pump 10% in a matter of minutes off of fake ETF news, what do we think is going to happen when a real Bitcoin ETF inevitably gets approved? And, let alone minutes, what's going to happen over the course of hours or days or weeks following a Bitcoin ETF approval when people actually have time to react to it, as opposed to this event where people who just happen to have been on Twitter at the time or been awake at the time were really the only ones that saw this in the mere minutes that it was up before it was taken down and proven to be false. And so I think what this does is that this shows us that whenever a Bitcoin ETF does get approved, the price of Bitcoin is, number one, going to go up double digits. And I think that's a no-brainer from what we've seen here. But also the pump's likely going to be greater than 10%. It could easily be double that in the case of everything that we just saw from this little pump. So again, if Bitcoin's able to move 10% in a matter of minutes, what's going to happen when a real Bitcoin ETF happens and people have hours or an extended period of time to react to this, especially if it's a big Bitcoin ETF approval like from BlackRock or one of those other players that have trillions of dollars in assets under management. So overall, Bitcoin ended up actually significantly green on the day, better than if this news would have not come out. And I think that goes a long ways to saying where the sellers are at, that even off of fake news, the sellers couldn't even push this back down to the open price of where all this started. And I think that's a little bit convincing, at least for me, about the strength of the sellers at this zone, is that even off of fake news, if the sellers are not able to push price down to where the fake news that pushed price up in the first place brought it to, then I think the sellers are just a little bit more weaker here. And as we said earlier, Bitcoin dominance was one of the biggest beneficiaries from this. This brought Bitcoin dominance back above 52%, and this put Bitcoin dominance at the highest level that we have seen since April of 2021, which is about 2.5 years ago. So Bitcoin is looking really, really strong, especially as we are heading into the halving and these Bitcoin ETF approvals. And it's outperforming a lot of the altcoin market, which isn't a bad thing. Because historically, that's one of the common factors that we see heading into a traditional market cycle, is that Bitcoin leads the way. And then, at some point when the altcoin season flips into happening, Bitcoin dominance drains as altcoins run. So if you're looking at this, this is certainly not a bad thing. Actually, this is a really good and healthy thing to see overall in the market. And there's a lot of people benefiting from this. So that's going to go ahead and round us off for today's video, everyone. If you did enjoy this, make sure you check out those links in the description down below. You can also smack that like button, smack that subscribe button. You get a little bit more content from us because we post videos every single week, multiple times a week, and we're here to help you out. So if you like the content that we make, consider sticking around, consider checking those links in the description down below. And until then, we'll see all of you in the next video.